when you talk about constitutional republic and what that actually means, a lot of folks don't, folks with college degrees don't understand that.
Right.
And there's a book that's really shaped my line of thinking when it comes to our government and how it was founded, and it's called The Making of America.
Right.
It used to be a college textbook, and I don't know how many thousands of pages are in it, but it's thick.
Yeah.
And so you go through it, and it really lays down exactly how we came to be, and
why,
and letters. Our founding fathers would write letters to one another, advocating for this belief that ended up in our Constitution.
Yeah.
And you get to hear their thinking on it. It's not just the words of the Constitution. It's, hey, this is why I believe this, and this is why this is important.
Yeah.
And so it's just an interesting. It'll change. That's another one I wish was a mandatory. If you're going to run for public office, you should understand.
Well, people don't know what hubris is either, because they'll look back at the founding fathers and think they didn't know everything. Well, they didn't mean fully automatic weapons when the Second Amendment was written. Well, you don't know that. They knew weapons would develop.
Well, they
knew that.
The most advanced weapon of their day.
Yeah.
They wanted you to carry.
Yeah.
And they wrote the Second Amendment with that in mind.
From the business capital of the world, the Big Apple, New York's Middle Tennessee, it says here. Sounds riveting.
It is.
This is the Mostly Middle Tennessee Business Podcast, a podcast about Middle Tennessee business owners and professionals.
Mostly. Yes, thank you, Mr. Matt Wilson. He is my brother from another mother up in Connecticut. He and I came up together in radio from 96, 97, and we both got into podcasting, oddly enough, because it's Radio 2.0. Check his podcast out, the Mostly Marketing Podcast with Matt Wilson. And yes, this is the Mostly Middle Tennessee Business Podcast, where we talk to Middle Tennessee business owners and professionals. We have real conversations that meander. So, it kind of might open up into other things, hopefully interesting things, and then we'll let you know a little bit more about what's in their lives and all that fun stuff. This is a video and audio podcast. Check us out at MMTBP.com. That's MMTBP.com. That would be wonderful, because we can, get you to subscribe, like, rate, all that fun stuff. Check us out there. And, of course, if you want to apply to be on the show, there's an application tab there that you can click on and let us know if you want to be a guest. That would be great. I am your host, Jim McCarthy, with JimMcCarthyVoiceovers.com and It's Your Show.co, where we produce podcasts just like this one. So if you're looking to get a podcast produced, hit us up at one of those places. Today, we're going local, going down into Maury County, which is just south of Williamson, probably about 40 miles south of Nashville, for someone who's becoming a friend of ours here. Met him a few times on several different occasions, and kind of talking about the politics of things down in the county level governments and fun stuff like that. Hopefully soon to be state level, right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Ray Jeter, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jim. I appreciate the invitation.
Thanks for coming out. You are a beard aficionado, I would take it.
Well, I try.
My goodness. That takes a lot of grooming, I would imagine, right?
Well, yeah.
Beard oil?
Yes, sir.
And does it?
All of the above.
Yeah, I got I can't get past the goatee on my face. I've had the beard around, but I can't have hair touching my lip.
Well, when I decided to run for state representative, I actually had a very much larger beard prior to and beginning of the race, and I've had a lot of folks reach out and say you might want to trim up a little bit.
Really?
I said, well, this is as good as it's going to get.
Right.
I said, if you want me to be clean shaven, one of two things: you either have never seen me clean shaven,
right,
or you want me to get divorced. My wife loves my beard and wants me to keep it. So.
Well, you got to keep her happy, right?
That's right.
So I kind of start off, I'm beginning to start off with hopefully interesting questions. I've been thinking over the past several episodes, I haven't been mentioning it, but here and there I have. There's somebody I'd really love to have on this podcast that's going to sit in your chair at some point. I'm convinced of this, and it's Dennis Quaid. Don't ask me why. It's just a hunch.
Yeah.
I don't know why. So I'm putting the call out there. Anybody who knows him, let him know that I think he's got a house here somewhere around the area. Love to have him on. Love to talk to him. I just feel like we're connected. I don't know. It sounds crazy. I know.
There you go.
But if you could talk to anybody and interview anybody, who would it be off the top of your head?
Shoot. Well, that's a hard question there.
Yeah.
Past, present, future.
Yeah.
For me, it'd be Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ.
If I could sit down in a room on a podcast or, I've got questions.
What question would you ask him?
Oh, there's so much. I mean, he's an very important part of my life. And,
right.
It's hard to top that one.
Yeah. I mean, that would be, a lot of people say in the last episode, my father, I think someone said Kenny Rogers at some point. So, and God does come up from time to time. How did you start with everything? You're, I would imagine, a little bit entrepreneurial. It takes a little bit of, if you want to get into politics, it takes a special type of person.
It does.
Right. But how did everything begin with you? Did you come up around here?
I did. So my family, I was actually born in Norman, Oklahoma. My family moved here. My family was in the concrete business. They were concrete finishers. Mm-hmm. And, business in Oklahoma City and Norman, Oklahoma back in the early 80s was not very good. And so they loaded up. I was two and a half, probably just before my third birthday. They loaded up and went east and didn't know where they were going to land. And it was my dad, my uncle, and my cousin, 3 different families. And they kind of picked up some work along the way and ended up in Chapel Hill, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
And did some work there and then ended up in Spring Hill. And I've been in Maury County ever since.
So since you were about 3 years old?
About 3 years old.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. So,
I mean, that definitely makes you a native. I mean, that's in the loosest sense of the word.
I said last night at an event, I can't say I was born here, but I've been definitely raised here.
Yeah. And when I lived in Vegas, if you were there for 6 months, you were considered a native.
There you go.
That's how transient it was. But I mean, you've seen this area really kind of come up into its own. I tell people all the time that Columbia to me was like where I grew up in Connecticut. There was a town called New Milford. And everybody for years, as long as I could remember, New Milford was just a place that was somewhat undesirable. It wasn't where you wanted to go to live. It was the affordable place to live. But by the time we left, when Courtney and I were in our early 20s, we got the job. It was actually the first place we moved out to was New Milford. It became really bougie, like fast, because it had that classic look, downtown feel. Believe it or not, the 2 weeks leading up to us moving away was they were shooting a movie downtown, an Adam Sandler movie called Mr. Deeds, which came out in 2001. So if you watch that movie, where Deeds Pizza is, that's literally maybe a quarter mile from where we had our apartment.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Small world.
So here the same thing is, we moved here in 2005, and I always said, you know what? Columbia has that same feel. I said, it's kind of, it's in the distance. People aren't ready to drive so far out there. Now it's off the charts, desirable.
It is. And we witnessed, we had First Fridays downtown Columbia this last Friday night.
Right.
And my wife and I sat on a bench out there and just observing the mass of individuals. It used to be 10 years ago, I would know 80% of the people.
Yeah.
That would walk that square in an event like that. And I'm sitting there and I didn't, I didn't run into probably 10% of the people that I knew.
Yeah.
And so being that I grew up here, there's a lot of, in Columbia, especially downtown Columbia, is really blowing up. It's really, it's entertaining. There's some really cool restaurants that's come in down there and some high-end restaurants. I mean, some great opportunities there and entertainment and I sat there and watched a bluegrass band Friday night, playing right there on the square for First Fridays. But we have my family and my wife's family. We've witnessed Maury County and Columbia just continue to bust at the seams. And, we remember when it was, quote unquote, a one horse town, it was just, it was slow and it was hard to find work and it was, somewhat in poverty. And we've watched as it's just expanded and grown. I mean, right here, we was talking the other night about the silo on 31. Spring Hill. When I was a kid, we would drive by that and because it was so close to the road you just, as a child, that's something that just got your attention.
Yeah.
And when they tore it down a few years ago and put a Chick-fil-A there's actually a monument there.
Really?
With a picture of the silo that was sitting right there. So, the locals who grew up here and drove by that and saw that as they grew up, you can go see a monument to the silo.
Yeah.
But we've just witnessed, and there's a lot of good and a lot of bad that comes with that, and
we've gotten a lot of attention in the last 5 years.
Yes.
This whole area.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite amazing because I look at like when you grew up was typically like your first, long-term embedded memory probably happened when you were late 80s, 86, 87. So at that particular point in time, I was, 10, 11, 12. And that, what I remember is Danbury. Danbury was like a suburb of New York City where all the people like my parents, when New York got really bad, everybody migrated out. So they migrated north. My father grew up in Yonkers, my mom in the Bronx. Yonkers was like farm country to them, which is funny because Yonkers is like concrete jungle now. But everybody moved to Danbury, where we grew up. And that was considered the country. But now it's unrecognizable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing. I would imagine the same thing happened down here during the 80s. I mean, your formidable years were in the early 90s. What was that like going to school, growing up here? I'm really curious about that.
Well, I remember very vividly. I was big into riding bicycles when I was that age, and they were actually building 40. We called it the bypass, but it was 43 bypass. And so if you go to 31 in Bear Creek, that's 43 that travels all the way from that location all the way down to Lawrence County and Lawrenceburg, and we called it the bypass. And so we were, I rode that when it was a dirt road and it was just gravel, and it was, I rode up and down it and just watched it get built around me, and, but, we just, we may do, I went to local schools here. I met my wife in kindergarten at Riverside Elementary School.
Really?
There in Maury County.
Did you know she was going to be your wife then?
No, she didn't either. But we did, and we met there and reconnected, and probably 10 or about 12 years, 11 and 12 years old, we reconnected, and it's just it's a great community, and it has been. And that's kind of what motivated me to run for county commission back 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Was, I love this area. I love this, what we have going on here. And it's got to take some work to maintain and to, make sure we keep some of that.
Yeah.
Growth is going to happen. Growth is part of life. But trying to help and manage some of that and help maybe foster in some smart growth. I just wanted to be a part of that.
Yeah. That's a good way to get involved.
Does your garage door sound like this? If it does, it's screaming for help. Call Incredible Doors, 931-348-DOOR. We're making garage doors in Murray and Williamson counties work better, sound better, and, spring better. We just make them incredible again. Incredible Doors in Spring Hill. For when your door's springs break, you need remote reconnections, opener installation, or just about anything to do with your garage door. Go to IncredibleDoors.com or call 931-348-DOOR. Follow us on Facebook for specials on maintenance visits, keypads, and other items. 931-348-DOOR.
It's a lot. It's a tremendous time involvement and commitment from your end, being a commissioner. Even though it was probably sold to you, not so. But
I knew a little bit about what I was getting into, but prior to that, I was the chief deputy at the Maury County Sheriff's Office, and I had to do my budgets and present to the county commission. So I knew a little bit about what was going to be entailed with it. And I tell you, it's what was a surprise for me is how polarizing some of the issues are, and some of the issues that we debate, and some of the issues that we take up, and you can have 2 or 3 major opposing opinions on an issue, and it's it's hard to convince 21 additional people on a commission to agree, to agree on an item sometimes, and so that's
keeps you sharp.
It does, and I can tend to be very passionate. If you go back and watch videos on issues that I've been passionate about, I can be very passionate, and I can and I get that way. And sometimes I have to apologize for that passion a little bit. And I've had to do that a couple of times, not too, or recently. And so, but you believe in something and you fight for it and you think it's what's right for the people of your district. And so, that's all we can do.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, when I go home, put my head down at night, I know that I've done what I think is best for the people of Maury County, and not just my opinion. It's I'm represented. I'm elected to represent them.
Yeah.
And their needs and their issues, and so I have a big time open ear to that and listen to what they have to say and their input, and it does persuade me many times on this. If I'm on the fence on an issue, I'll take up some calls or some emails. And I'll help shape my opinion based on what the constituent, the folks in my district, what their opinions are on the matter. So,
which is what the job is.
That's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Now, getting back to your formal upbringing and stuff like that, having such an embedded experience growing up here, first jobs, things of that nature. What did you do? What did you want to do when you grew up?
Well, it was our family was in the concrete business, and so I begged and pleaded every summer. Let me go to work. Let me go to work. Let me go to work.
Really?
And they had a rule in our family: you couldn't go to work until you was 11 years old. 11. And so I convinced.
When I was fighting going to work, my father would make me work.
Yeah, and so it was it was embedded in us and our family that, and for me it was about freedom. I knew if I went to work, I would earn money, and we grew up very poor.
Right.
Very poor. I mean, I went to school one year. If there's teachers, in Riverside or Baker Elementary School could probably testify to this. I went to school one year with flip-flops.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't afford tennis shoes.
Wow.
And so I got in trouble the first day of that year because it's a school rule, you have to have socks. Mm-hmm. Well, have you ever tried to wear socks and flip-flops?
Yeah.
It didn't work.
It's not popular.
But I got in a lot of fights that year. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of how we grew up. And I knew that if I was able to go to work and earn some money, that I could, it would provide some freedom for me. And so I was excited about it.
Want to hear something that sounds absolutely pathetic? I too had a shoe issue when I grew up in middle school. Because back then, the Air Jordans came out. And they were $110 pair of sneakers, which, my parents could afford it, but there was no way they were ever going to buy. No, you're getting the canvas sneakers that are like, generic name brand. Yep. That's good enough because you're going to ruin them. And, oh, yeah. I used to get my butt kicked because I'm like, dude, really? I can't afford these things.
Same.
Yeah. Crying out loud.
But I remember the first summer I was allowed to go to work, and it was actually right before my 11th birthday because my birthday's in August. So I was able to go to work. I was 10, just about to turn 11. Mm-hmm. And I got paid $2 a day. And if you've ever done concrete work, $2 a day is
a pittance.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was, for me, it was every bit of that money. It really taught me, the importance of the value of that dollar.
Yeah.
And I worked hard for those $2 every day.
Concrete's not fun.
It's not. And so I grew up doing that. And I actually got to, later in my teenage years, and I remember thinking, boy, there's got to be an easier way to live. Like, I don't, and I remember my uncle and my dad was having a conversation. And what was I going to do? What was Ray Jeter going to do? Was I going to take up the family business and maintain that tradition? And I remember having a conversation. I don't know. I was probably 16 or 17. And I was like, you know what, guys, I think I want to work smarter. Mm-hmm. I want to figure out a better way to make money than bust my tail every day. And so I did. I actually got into my wife. I started dating my wife, and we got married, and I began interning with my father-in-law in the plumbing business. And I skipped a lot of information there with that, but I did. I interned with him, learned the trade, the plumbing trade, and started my own plumbing business.
And it's funny because you go from one very hard on the body trade to another hard on the body trade.
Yeah. Plumbing
is not easy either.
No, it's not. I will say it's slightly easier than concrete labor.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed, and my business was, we repaired and fixed residential plumbing. And so I enjoyed coming in and solving problems for my customers. And I did that for 8 years and grew the business, actually invested a bunch of money back into the business and got into the septic business and got into installing new plumbing on new homes, and then the recession hit.
In 08.
In 08.
Right.
And it took me about a year and a half. I remember about 2009, I said something to my buddy, and I said, you know what, I'm doing pretty good. I don't think this recession is going to affect me. And boy, I've eat those words.
Wow.
And it wasn't probably a year later that it became a reality for me that I was going to lose my business.
Oh, really?
And
which is funny because you think that a trade would be somewhat recession proof.
My problem is folks started fixing their own plumbing.
Oh yeah.
When the money's tight and this is that, you might go in and fix your pipe or try to fix it yourself and make it last a little bit longer than paying me to come do it. And we saw that. And of course the new construction just died down to about nothing.
Yeah.
And so I had kind of leveraged my business in that direction, and it just kind of all hit me at once.
It was kind of funny because at that particular time, I would imagine there were a lot of YouTube guys showing people how to fix plumbing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's where they were going.
Yep. Oh, I guarantee there was. And so that just kind of led me to it kind of helped shape who I am as far as a business, entrepreneur type. I know what it's like to know that, you make a good money today, but that doesn't, you got to put that money back, and you got to, save it for a rainy day. And when those bad times come, you got to be prepared for that, even when the good times are with you. And so it's been a fun ride with that. I actually began volunteering and reserving at the sheriff's office kind of as a hobby.
Right.
During, right before all that kind of took place. And when that kind of fell through, I decided to go into law enforcement full time. Went to the police academy in 2010 and was hired on by, it's actually it's a pretty cool story. I was hired on by Metro Nashville Police Department, and I was trying to get on to sheriff's office, and there wasn't a position available. And if you ever have tried to get on a position like that, there's a system called a civil service, and it's a problematic. It's very, it may take you 6 to 8 months to get a job with the sheriff's department, who's managed under a civil service process. But it's just a lengthy process, and so there wasn't a position in the civil service and all that jazz. I ended up getting hired with Metro Nashville Police Department. And was up there, at their academy, their police academy. I think I was there 5 or 6 days. And probably the 5th day, the sheriff down here in Maury County at the time was Sheriff Enoch George. He calls me. And actually, he left me a message because I was in the academy. Well, there, you come home every night. So I'm driving home and I'm tired. It's the first week of the police academy. It's what they call hell week, right? And it's rough. And so I'm driving home, I'm tired, I'm still sweating and all that. And I see my phone, I got a voicemail from the sheriff. So I call them back and they offer me a position to come to the sheriff's office in Maury County. For me, it was a no-brainer. And I went home, I talked to my wife and went back the next day to Metro Nashville Police, the police academy up there, and just told them that, I'm going to be leaving, and I just kind of want to walk through that process with you. And they were very, very nice to me. And they, the guy I can't even recall his name, but the instructor of the police academy there, he says, we're going to pay you for the whole day today. We just want you to sit here in the office. He says, the chief is going to come down. He wants to talk to you before you leave. The chief of police of the Nashville Metro Police Department wants to talk to me, and because I've chose to go to another department. Yeah. And I just, I waited there, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 hours. And he came in every now and again and said, he's on the way, he's got a meeting, but he's going to be here. So anyway, he shows up and he has a conversation with me, and it was a very cordial conversation. And he asked me to stay. And I was very impressed with that. Like just the I was nobody. Yeah. And but he understood. I wanted to serve in the county that I grew up in. And so he understood that, and you can't, there's no money to that. You can't put a money dollar to that, or you can't, make an incentive. I wanted to serve the people that I lived with in my community. So, pretty cool. And then I went to the sheriff's office and started my career there. So ended up going to the police, Toledo, the state's police academy, and graduated that. And
was that always something that you wanted to do? Was that like a childhood dream?
It was, that in the military. I was never a part of the military, but I always wanted to, and that and law enforcement was kind of something that
goes hand in hand.
Yeah, it was something I've always dreamed about. And when I heard of an opportunity to volunteer as a reserve deputy, I jumped on it, when that opportunity was presented, and had a great time with the Maury County Sheriff's Office Reserve Unit.
Tell me, going back to the when the business, collapsed, I guess, back in 08, 09, what was your mindset like? Those had to be for a lot of people, it was dark. But going through something like that, dark days, what kept your mind positive? What would you do on a regular basis? Of course, you're going to have those days where you get up and like, what just happened? I just lost everything. Tell me about that experience.
Well, my wife sometimes gets very angry with me because I've always been a glass half full kind of guy.
Right.
Positive, everything's going to be okay. There's always hope. There's always something to look forward to. And so even during that time, it was hard. It was hard on our family. We lost in that process. We lost our home. Mm-hmm. Not only did we lose our business, but we lost our first home that we ever purchased, and the first home we ever owned. And that's a struggle. Mm-hmm. That is hard, especially hard on the wife and the two kids, and I'm a man of faith, and I believe that God had a plan. And again, my attitude of a glass half full kind of guy, it doesn't allow me to dwell very long on the negative.
You just find
move on. What's the next thing? What's the next goal? What's the next mission? And go for it. So,
that also it toughens you up for situations that you're probably going to have to go through anyway.
Right.
All these things happen that make you have the fortitude and the grit and the gut to get through even bigger situations, because you can look back on it and say, well, I've been here before.
Yeah.
And you probably got, even getting into serving public office, things of that nature, running for office on a bigger level, those things have to come into play for somebody who is, trying to pick out who they want to go with at the election time.
Yep.
That's something to keep in mind, to have that relevancy that they can relate to you in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, being that I've raised here, and that I've had a lot of different opportunities in my life that I can fall back to, and that I can relate with, and that I can, relate with other folks with. And it sure it allows for good conversations with the people of Maury County, for sure. So
you ended up, you were at the police department for a season, mm-hmm. and then you ended up getting into a different business as well, which is, I imagine, what you're currently doing.
Yeah. So I served at the sheriff's office as a patrol deputy. I worked night shift patrol for a large portion of that, which I loved at first and hated towards the end. It was about a 3.5 year time on night shift patrol, or about a 30-year term on that. And, I realized after 3 years of night shift that, I like to sleep, and I like to sleep at night. And so having a young family with son and my daughter, and we ended up taking in my nephew. But being home during the day or being home at night was a big deal for me. So anyway, that's just a footnote there. But in 2014, I actually ran for county commission. In 2014, and we was also going through a sheriff's election in Maury County, big sheriff's election. Sheriff Enoch George had been sheriff for 20 years. It was retiring. And, that seat was open for grabs, and there, I can't remember how many, I think there was 4 or 5 different candidates that had put their name in the hat to run for sheriff. And didn't really know. I'd kind of put my chips in one of the hats there, and supported one of the guys there, but began to learn and began to meet and understand a guy named Bucky Rowland. Mm-hmm. He's our current sheriff at Maury County.
Right.
And through that time, we worked together at the sheriff's office, but we really didn't. I worked night shift patrol, and I barely ran into him. He was on the K-9 unit, and he was in and out and doing his own thing. But I knew who he was. I knew that he was a good guy, but I had kind of supported one of his opponents. But as we got further down in there, I realized pretty quick that Sheriff Rowland was he needed to be the sheriff. Mm-hmm. His heart for the people of Maury County, and if there's somebody you want on your podcast to tell you his story, if you can get him on here, he would be a great podcast. I promise you that. His
Consider
story,
that an invitation right now.
That's right. But his story is unlike any story I've ever heard. But I'll let him tell it. But got to know him. Decided that my family was gonna support him for sheriff, and I was running for county commission. He was running for sheriff at the same time. And I realized that through some circumstances there, that I realized that it was 10-1 more important that he wins his sheriff race than I win my county commission race.
Oh, wow.
And so I decided to kind of shift gears. I was already on the ballot. I couldn't back out of that, but I quit campaigning for myself. And I began, my family and a lot of my friends, we began campaigning and helping, trying to do what we could to get Sheriff Bucky Rowland elected for the first time. And I'm telling you all that to tell you this, and had no idea he gets elected. He wins. I can't remember. It was like 70 votes or something. He ends up winning the election in 2014. And 7 days later, I had no idea this was going to happen. He approached me and asked me to be his chief deputy. And so I went from deputy at the Maury County Sheriff's Office to second in command as chief deputy.
Oh, wow.
And it was big shoes. It was a big responsibility, and it was a lot of work. But I had a guy ask me one time during that time, how can you do, I was 33 years old. How can you go from deputy to chief deputy? And I didn't rehearse this. It was like the Lord just gave it to me in that moment. And I said, a man that kneels before God can stand before anybody.
Yeah.
And I learned, I may not have the answer. I may not have the tools. I may not, but I can go find it. And enjoyed it. It was a season of our life for 6 years. Sheriff Rowland and I served together, him sheriff and me the chief deputy, and we got a lot of things accomplished within that sheriff's office that to this day I'm very proud of. I'll take to my grave as some of the greatest things that's happened in Maury County in that sheriff's office, and that I could be a part of that. So fast forward all the way to 2019, the guy I grew up with, one of my best friends, he reaches out to me, and he has started, actually, during the time I had my plumbing business, he had an excavation business at the same time. And so I would hire him to come in and dig septic tanks for me, and I'd put the plumbing in, and we kind of mixed our business a little bit and partnered on some jobs and this and that. Well, he kind of had the same deal. He lost his business at the same time I lost mine. And so long story short, he moved, he goes to Iowa where he's from, and he ends up coming back, and he restarts his business in 2012. And he's been growing and growing and growing, and gets to 2019, and his business is bigger than he can manage.
Yeah.
And he needs help. And so he began talking to me, man, what would it look like if you slid over here and helped me manage this thing? This is becoming a beast over here, and I need some help. And so, at first conversation, I almost laughed at him. Like, I'm having the time of my life over here doing this, and just kind of dismissed it. And I mean, he kept on and kept on and kept on. I think 6 months into this, I began, what would this look like? Like, for real, what would this look like? And so it got down to the nitty gritty of it, and he offered me a certain amount of money to do this certain amount of, this task, with the freedom to help grow the business. And my entrepreneur spirit came out. It came out, and I got kind of excited about it. And it was a very, very hard decision, because I really loved what I did at the sheriff's office. Yeah. And the people I was able to serve with, and ultimately I met with the sheriff and gave him a 3-month notice. It was a hard conversation. Me and Sheriff Rowland still very close to this day. And, but we were very close then and very close now, but it was hard. It was hard for our families to make that separation, and we were doing a lot of good. Yeah. But, I believe that the Lord had a plan, and he had, his will was involved in that. And so, in January 2020, I left the sheriff's office and went to Harness LLC. Started out as a project manager. Now today I'm the chief operations officer for Harness. We've got about 100 employees. Oh, wow. When I started, we had 23. And so we've grown this thing, and just really really love what I'm doing. I get to work with my son every day. Nice. He's our lead estimator at Harness, and he does a phenomenal job, and my wife's the lead analyst. So, we all do it. We all just kind of do it together and enjoy working and being a part of that and growing something that means something to 100 families.
Yeah.
And
but that wasn't busy enough. You had to go and run for county commissioner again.
Well,
right?
I left the sheriff's office and was very service minded and scratching that itch, right?
Yeah.
And I leave there, and 2 years later, I realized that I'm not doing anything. I don't feel like I'm doing enough for Maury County,
right?
And I'm not involved enough in Maury County service wise. And so, I did. I thought about it. I prayed about it and decided to put my name in the hat for county commission, and was elected, obviously, for that. And I've enjoyed doing that too. And it's allowed me to, be an entrepreneur like I love, and also be service minded and serve my community to the best of my ability.
You certainly integrated into community, that's for sure.
Yes, sir.
With the business and with the office. Was there an incumbent at the time? Forgive me for my ignorance.
No, both incumbents chose not to run again. And so there's actually in Maury County, there are 11 districts, but there's 2 county commissioners for every district.
Right.
And so there's 2. There's Commissioner Gabe Howard and myself as the commissioners for the 8th district. So both of the incumbent commissioners decided to retire, and there was 3 of us running in that race.
Okay.
So Gabe and myself.
And now you're moving on to, you got higher sights to state rep.
Yes, sir.
Any particular reason that you see, like what spurred the motivation to do it, to pursue it?
Well, the list goes on and on. I'll just say that. But right. I will say this. I learned, as I'm serving on the county commission and as we're dealing with some major issues, and I'm talking generational issues, and as we're seeking help from our state representatives and we're seeking help from the state of Tennessee, and, you do that for a couple of years and you realize that sometimes those, elected officials sometimes lose sight of what their purpose is. Mm-hmm. And when you're an elected official and you're elected by the people of your district, you're to represent them and their needs. And they are, it goes back to my motto on every one of my signs. If you drive through Maury County, you see a Ray Jeter sign. It says right at the bottom of it, Maury first. Mm-hmm. We witnessed with our own eyes on the county commission how we weren't the first priority. There were special interest groups, special interest monies that led those decisions. Mm-hmm. And you do that and you see that with your firsthand. And as somebody like me who's grown up in Maury County, I just believe Maury County deserves better.
Yeah.
I believe Maury County deserves a representative that's going to represent them, that's going to listen to them, that's going to hear them, that's going to take into account their concerns. And when you go up to the state house, when those lobbyists and those special interest groups come knocking at your door, you got to weigh every decision you make, every conversation you have with how will this affect the people in my district? Mm-hmm. And that's bottom line. That's what representative government was designed to do.
Right.
Our forefathers, state representatives in Congress, everybody always asks me this. Well, why do they only have 2-year terms? Well, if you study history, our forefathers wanted those seats, those officials. They wanted it mandated that they had to get back into their districts every 2 years
to face the music,
yeah. Hear from the people, hear what needs to be done, and be held accountable. When you have a 4-8-year term, it's hard to be held accountable. You've got a lot of runway there.
It's like you're anointed at that point.
Yeah. And so I love the 2-year term model. I love that our founding fathers had the wisdom to do that.
Yeah.
Because, and I've said it at an event a couple weeks ago, if I get up there, and if I change and I become a representative that represents these special interest groups and these lobbyists, and I just neglect the people of my district, I hope in 2 years y'all replace me.
Yeah.
That's my true sentiment. And so I love that model. I love the 2-year terms.
I was talking to somebody, I've had several different political, not activists, but politicians on in the past. And we talked about how, at the federal level, it's almost like hopeless at this point because the same people get reelected, whether it's from the ignorance from the American people or not. It's name recognition at that point once you're in the voting booth because, everybody's lives are so busy. We're so busy making a living We're trying to, keep up with inflation at this point in time. We're trying to do this. We're trying to raise kids. We're trying to, do all these different things. And you're running and running and running and running. And who has the time to study up on these people?
Yeah.
You just kind of hope you make the best decision. And sometimes it just comes down to name recognition at that point.
It does.
Is that something that in this case, you're kind of facing that,
I am. And it kind of goes on, my opponent, he has big money from out of this area and out of the state of Tennessee backing him. Yeah. If, I had somebody call me this morning and said that they've gotten 10 mailers from my opponent, 10 in the last week. That's more than one a day.
Yeah.
And those mailers are expensive.
Oh, yeah.
They're anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000, $8,000 a piece.
And they're so ineffective because they go right into the trash.
Yeah. And so, but all that money's being funneled into this race.
Yeah.
And I can't get anybody to tell me why.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a very conservative Republican, Why are entities outside of Maury County and in this case outside of the state of Tennessee funneling so much money into this campaign?
Right.
And so I don't know the answer to that. I can make assumptions, and I don't like to make assumptions. We all know what that means, right? I don't like to make that, but I just don't. That's what I'm up against. Mm-hmm. And but I believe in grassroots movements. I believe in every door that I knock on, every citizen that I talk to, every individual that affords me the opportunity to share my vision, I feel I have a very strong possibility of persuading their vote.
Yeah.
And so that's getting my message out there and fighting that is what we've been doing the last few months.
There was a post I saw not too long ago. Maybe it was for Father's Day or Flag Day or something like that. A lot of shade thrown in the comments section, from what I remember.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people in tune with there's a swell against the person.
Yes,
so I don't know if we can mention their name or whatever.
Well, I don't. It is what it is. I'm sure. There's a politically. My opponent and I, we probably line up. I don't know, 90%.
Yeah.
In our beliefs. And it may not be, I don't know what that number is. I'm guessing. Right.
Right.
And so, but the problem is, I think where I am different is that, I can have a conversation with somebody that I disagree with, and that person can walk away and go, you know what, Ray's a nice guy.
Right.
You don't get that from my opponent. Mm-hmm. If you disagree with him or he disagrees with you, you know it, and you walk away feeling, somewhat disrespected. Right. And there's, and he, he's made some comments about our public school systems and our schools and our teachers and parents and these folks are upset, mm-hmm. And that's what you see in the shade that's being thrown in some of the comments on some of the posts is just upset Maury Countyans who just, they're tired of it. They're tired of not being properly representative. They're tired of not being heard. They're tired of not being seen. Mm-hmm. And, we have to quit being as politicians, and sometimes I'm guilty of this too. And so I have to check myself, but we have to quit listening to people with the sole purpose of responding to them.
Right.
And we have to listen to understand. We have to listen to try to understand their needs, their concerns, and their issues. When you start doing that and you start listening to your people of your district and you listen to understand them, guess what? You become more respectable to them. And they sense that. And when you listen to somebody just waiting for that opportunity to say your piece and try to convince them, that's not representative government. That's almost tyranny.
Yeah.
And so we just got to get back to the basics of that. We got to get back to what we're supposed to do as representatives.
Well, I think there's hope in the future. There is definitely, I always talk about it. It comes up every now and then. My theory on what I call, well, not what I call, but it's from a book called Pendulum. And it talks about societal, cultural shifts that happen every 20, 40, 80 years. And right now, we just passed a very pivotal point. Like in 2023, it's what they call a zenith of a we cycle. So that happens every 40 years. So the last time we went through a we was 1943. We essentially lived through 1943 all over again. The only way that these times get kind of reset is with some sort of a calamity, which has not happened yet. But if you draw it back every 80 years, we've had a calamity.
Right.
80 years ago was World War II. Before that, it was a Civil War. Before that, it was a Revolutionary War. Big cultural shaping, historic events have happened on that cycle. So what is it to be now? And in the book, they talk about it. Well, we're not exactly looking forward, but that's typically what it needs in order for us to reset as humans.
Right.
And the next generation to kind of say, okay, I've had enough of the last 20 years. Let's start pulling this pendulum down to what the tipping points typically are, the most peaceful times. In this case, empathy is huge. Right. Like to your point talking about earlier, listening to understand, not to respond. Being able to articulate your antagonist viewpoint better than they can is a massive, massive trait if you can have it these days. Yeah. That's what will get us through and weather us without some sort of a calamity, which I'm not sure is avoidable at this point. But well, people have said we've never been more divided, and I'm like, well, there was a Civil War that was pretty divided.
It was. It was.
So
no, we don't want anything like that to happen, but time will tell.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things have happened in the last, several years. Of course, unprecedented times, as they always talked about. But we still weathered through it. Part of the book that it talks about is Ezekiel. There's nothing new under the sun. Right. We've been through this before.
Well, I have this. Belief or philosophy. They talk about the greatest generation.
Yeah.
Those individuals, why were they called that? They were called that because they were faced with the greatest challenge. And I believe in America, and I believe there's a lot of, you said earlier, shade. There's a lot of shade cast on Americans and young Americans today, and what would happen if we were faced with that kind of challenge, World War II challenge. And I just have this fundamental belief that that generation was the greatest generation because they had the greatest challenge. And if we were presented with another greatest challenge, that the young people of this country would respond to that.
I'm actually in very much agreement with you, because another philosophy that I studied was from a book that was almost like the predecessor to the Pendulum books, called Generations. And in that book, I think it was actually a successor to that book called The Fourth Turning. They talked about how the greatest generation, people who are of teenage, early 20s right now, are of that same characteristic. They're almost like of George Washington's type of mentality. But it was almost the reason why World War II worked was because that generation had a reverence for the senior generation. Generally, they took direction and the commandments and things of that nature from they had reverence for their peers, their seniors, the senior leadership in the military and such. Right. In Vietnam, that had flipped. So the opposite was true. Right. We just did this 20 years ago. Why are we doing this again? I don't understand why are we doing this again? What, we're going over there, we're losing 50, 60,000 people. I don't believe in what we're doing.
Right.
It's almost like what you're seeing in Russia and Ukraine. I made that kind of comparison not too long ago. I said, the Ukrainians seem to be winning because they have a belief. The Russians the troops are going, okay, I'm doing this because you're telling me to do this. I don't feel it here.
Right.
I don't know why we're doing this.
Right.
That matters.
It does. It does matter. And that's been the backbone of our society from the very beginning.
Yep.
We came about against some great odds. America did.
Yeah.
And I just believe, I think there's a revival of our youth that's coming up, and I think it's going to show up in the November election. I just, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting ride, for sure.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. The election I'm just worried about, and that could be the spark that ignites the, powder keg, so to speak. Because if it goes one way, it's going to be rigged. If it goes the other way, people are going to say it's rigged. Yeah. I heard something said the other day. I didn't say I had 81. I said I had 81 million votes, not voters. And I was like, well, that's kind of funny. And I really don't get involved with political talk because it's just, what's the point? Yeah. If I can sit in front of the person with empathy and have that kind of a conversation, then they can read your tone. They could feel how you're coming off. All these things that happen on social media isn't helping.
Right.
People getting in arguments on Facebook, never mind the grammar and the misspellings and, run-on sentences. That's just a whole separate issue. But you can't, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still.
That's right.
Always and forever, man.
That's absolutely the truth.
As soon as we realize that as a populace, we just got to realize there's only so much we can control.
Well, the more divided we are, the less, it's hard to, divided, united we stand, divided we fall.
Yeah.
Right. And the more divided we get, and sometimes I wonder if that's not the agenda. Let's get Americans hating one another and hating on one another and not focus on what the true issues are.
And that to the point of pendulum, it actually makes a lot of these points, because what was starting out as a good thing and a refreshing set of ideologies 20 years ago, 03, 04, every single time we go up to the zenith on either side, it's taking a good thing too far. Okay, this is getting ridiculous.
Right.
And if you look around it has been a course of division throughout the last, especially 10 years. Which within the 20-year upswing, there are little divisions of time that mean certain things, even on the downswing coming. It's a fascinating read. You should really check it out. It's in the notes that I always put in there. You can go to Amazon and buy it. It's a good listen. And it was based on a guy out of Austin, Texas, who wrote a trilogy of marketing books back in the 90s called The Wizard of Ads. And he always liked to watch and study what made people tick. And all of a sudden, all the ads they were writing, overnight, stopped working. Something in the language wasn't resonating with people. So, okay, what happened? And they just discovered this, systolic, diastolic shifting of cultures, like the tides, like breathing. You got to exhale, you got to inhale. That does happen with cultural attitudes.
Right.
And for the things that they talk about are the, I'm okay, you're okay. I'm not okay, you're okay. I'm not okay, you're not okay. And I'm okay, you're not okay, which is the last one is what we're in right now.
Right.
Everybody, it's not me, it's you. You're the problem.
Yeah.
And it's that empathy we got to bring back, man.
No.
But we are at a point where a good thing has been taken too far.
Yeah.
Vastly.
No, I get that. I think that's why local government is so important.
Absolutely.
And when if we've lost Washington D.C., that just makes state government that much more important.
Yeah.
And if we've lost or going to lose state government, it makes local government that much more important. And
because it's closer to, you're in the vicinity of control.
Yeah.
These are the things you can control. Your vote has much more direct impact on a local municipal level than ever before.
Well, who's president matters.
Yeah.
Who leads matters. There's no question with that. And I think everybody should be, involved in those politics as well. But the county commissioner is the one that's going to raise your property taxes.
Right.
Or lower your property taxes or build a road through your farmland and so local government matters. Mm-hmm. And so, and that was part of my struggle with deciding to take on this venture of running for state representative. What's more important to me, local government or state government?
Right.
And I had to come to the conclusion, and the answer to that was yes.
Yeah.
They're both important to me. And so that was kind of part of my process of making this decision.
Well, I mean, also it helps having somebody with the county's interests in mind at a higher office with that kind of influence, But to your point, like you said, if in 2 years it doesn't match up with what I wanted to do 2 years prior, then yeah, throw me out of my butt.
Yeah. Well, I think it ought to be mandatory. If you're a state representative, you should have served prior to that as a city councilman or a county commissioner from the area that you're from. So many times decisions are made up there without any regard with the local municipalities, or sometimes it's disregard.
Yeah.
And so we witnessed that. And so, just advocating, and that they say that doesn't matter. It does matter, because that is a direct impact on the people of those counties and those cities. And so, that's again, was part of my decision making, and how can I advocate for the little guy?
Well, not only that, even it's reintroducing basic civics into the public school system. If they're not already doing that, because I don't think anybody really knows. I mean, Americans that are born here, I would imagine immigrants know more about civics in our country than we do.
Well, one of the biggest surprises, this is the first time I've said this publicly, one of the biggest surprises
Got a scoop.
of running for this position is how many times I'm asked from, in very intelligent adults, what exactly does a state representative do?
I'm just as guilty, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, explain to me how this works. Why is it a 2-year term? What, it just, there is a lack of understanding of how our government actually works and these elected officials. And that's become very concerning to me. Yeah. You're electing people and you don't even understand what they do.
Yeah.
Or how they do it or why they do what they do, and so I was actually offended the first couple of times I got that question. And then I took it as a challenge. Every time I'm asked that question, I'm going to do the best I can to explain it to you.
Yeah.
And I may not get it right. I may not get it perfect, but I'm going to explain to you my understanding of what this role does and how it can affect you and your family.
Well, here's the thing is that, maybe that's what's needed. Sit down, let's do a video of it, break it on down. Say, look, I really get a lot of questions. This isn't me trying to be condescending or anything like that. I just want to break it down, what these roles really mean and why they're important to you. That's not a bad idea.
No, I agree.
I think maybe sitting down and doing a video like that would be in order.
No.
I mean, especially leading up, because it's August 2nd, you said?
August 1st is the early voting actually starts this Friday.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So early voting from the 12th to the 27th, and then election day is August the 1st.
Well, we're going to fast track this. So this comes out the week. It'll be out next Tuesday. So from today's Tuesday, so a week from now. Okay. Today's the 9th, so middle of the month. Hopefully we'll get you some exposure on it.
It'll be good.
But I mean, a lot of I think that's probably in order because I'm just as guilty, man. I know it's a bigger role. It's a little bit more widespread. Like, how many districts are there in Tennessee?
There's 99.
99, okay. Yeah. And you're on 16 or 64.
Yeah, there's 95 counties, and there's 99 state representative districts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so basically you're representing the county.
So my district, the 64th, is divided into, so the 71st and the 64th make up Maury County.
Okay.
The 64th is entirely inside Maury County. So we have the city of Columbia, small portion of the city of Spring Hill, and the entire east side of Maury County.
Okay.
And so now the 71st, for instance, which is the west side of Maury County, I think it's in Lawrence County and it may be another county southwest. So they're in 2 or 3 different counties, and I'm kind of blessed, and the 64th is all in my backyard. It's right here in Maury County.
Right.
So,
well, I would actually, I could actually garner a lot of information. Some people just don't know. Some people think we live in a democracy. We don't. Yeah. It's a constitutional republic. Yeah. There is no democracy.
And I get very frustrated when I hear long-term Republicans talk about democracy. Mm-hmm. Because you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Our founding fathers did not set up a democracy.
Right.
They set up a constitutional republic.
That I do know. Yeah.
There is a difference.
There's a huge difference.
There's a huge difference, and so I get frustrated when Republicans, call us a democracy when we're not.
Well, I think at that point they're kind of they know.
Yeah.
I think they're peddling an idea that they know is easy to swallow and that people generally just accept because that's what they hear. Yeah. Even though it's the wrong idea.
Well, I think they, again, it's dumbing down the words.
Right.
Right. We don't truly know what a democracy is.
It's almost like government and banking go hand in hand, and investments. You ever watch The Big Short, the movie? Mm-mm. Oh, man, what a great... Talk about like what you're describing and doing in a video for government and explaining what the different levels mean in the offices. They explain the financial markets and how they intentionally name things to be confusing. So it invokes and it basically compels people, okay, I don't understand this. I need you, Mr. Stockbroker, to do this on my behalf and explain it to me. And I need to pay you to do it.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Well, I'll have to check that movie out.
Oh man, it's incredible. It breaks everything that you went through in 2008. It breaks it down beautifully. I've probably watched it 9 times, and I'm still like, okay, what was that again? That's just my learning process. Repetition. Mm-hmm. That's why I have to listen to Pendulum probably 9 times as well. Just you pick up new things and stuff like that. We do with the Bible.
That's right.
You unpack it's like an onion. But man, you pick up. Bespoke tranche opportunities, which is basically the same thing that led us into disaster. Those are a product now.
Wow,
that you can purchase.
Yeah.
Well,
I think dumbing the words down and changing the meaning of words.
Yeah.
And it lessens the impacts.
Yeah.
And
gosh, you are so on point, buddy.
When you talk about constitutional republic and what that actually means, a lot of folks don't, folks with college degrees don't understand that.
Right.
And there's a book that's really shaped my line of thinking when it comes to our government and how it was founded, and it's called The Making of America.
Right.
It used to be a college textbook.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many thousands of pages are in it, but it's thick.
Yeah.
And so you go through it, and it really lays down exactly how we came to be,
mm-hmm.
and
why,
and letters. Our founding fathers would write letters to one another, advocating for this belief that ended up in our Constitution.
Yeah.
And you get to hear their thinking on it. It's not just the words of the Constitution. It's, hey, this is why I believe this, and this is why this is important.
Yeah.
And so it's just an interesting, it'll change. That's another one I wish was a mandatory. If you're going to run for public office, you should understand.
Well, people don't know what hubris is either, because they'll look back at the founding fathers and think they didn't know everything. Well, they didn't mean fully automatic weapons when the Second Amendment was written. Well, you don't know that. They knew weapons would develop.
Well, they
knew that.
The most advanced weapon of their day.
Yeah.
They wanted you to carry.
Yeah.
And they wrote the Second Amendment with that in mind.
Yeah.
So you take that same perspective to our Constitution today in the Second Amendment. We should have the right to keep and bear arms defined as the most advanced weapons of the day.
Yeah.
That's how it was written.
For the very reason they needed them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so you can't, that's not well accepted in half the population, but that's the truth of the matter.
It is.
And they didn't have bow and arrows. That wasn't their arms. They had muskets, and that was the most advanced weaponry they had.
Right.
And cannons, and you had the right to keep that as an American citizen, and not only keep it, but to bear it.
Well, I was going to make the point earlier, for those people who would dare say that, well, the founding fathers, it was a different time, they were ignorant, or blah, blah, blah. I say, you know what? Have you tried reading the Federalist Papers? I mean, have you ever tried reading anything from that particular point in time? It takes me a few times just to read a sentence, because the way they wrote and the way they spoke.
The Old English.
It was so eloquent.
Yeah.
It was so well spoken. The Constitution itself is a beautiful document. The Declaration of Independence itself is a beautiful document. Who came up? It's just amazing to me.
Well, I think one of the great things, I think it was Representative Sheila Butt that when she was one of our state representatives, she's now the mayor of Maury County.
Yeah.
But I think and I may get this wrong, but I know she was there at the time, but one of the bills that she may have sponsored or was a part of was putting cursive writing back in our schools.
Yeah.
And, people don't think how important that is, but you teach a whole don't teach a whole generation how to read and write in cursive. Well, what document is written in cursive? We have a whole block of individuals that can't read the Constitution.
Yeah.
They can't read the Declaration of Independence because they can't read cursive.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a bill that passed, I don't know, several years ago, probably eight years ago, that was a big deal to me, and I thought was important.
Yeah, she taught our kids how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So read it and write it. But, a lot of people just getting into it, they don't realize that the states, the way I explain it to people, I said, they set up the states because they're almost like little countries within a big one. If you don't like it here, then you can move there. If they accept, you want a certain way of life, they kind of lean that way. Go there.
Yeah.
That's your choice. We believe something here. This is the general populace. It's consensus, and let's just move forward with this. But, they want a blanket type of approach to everything. And on either side, both sides, legislating morality when you get to it.
Yeah.
So how do people find and follow you and discover you more?
Well, I'm on Facebook, Ray Jeter for State Representative. You can just search that and I'll pop up. My website, that's where everything is driven to, and that's mauryfirst.com. Mm-hmm. It's spelled MAURY, mauryfirst.com, and spelled out there. And just check me out. There's a lot of information there about my platform, what I believe, some of the things that I plan to do when I get to the State House, and would just love an opportunity to advocate and fight for the people of Maury County.
So what was rayjeter.com available?
It probably was. I didn't. You said that. Now I'm going to have to go buy the domain before somebody else does.
Oh, you got a week's time. That's one of the things that I kind of help businesses do. I'm like, oh man, I'm like, is Ray Jeter available? I should go with that. You know?
No, it's not about me,
but it is.
It's about the people of Maury County, and I want to advocate, and I want it known that I'm gonna fight for the people of Maury County first.
Right on, man.
And so
terrific. Go check him out there, mauryfirst.com. Find out the platforms, his beliefs, like he said. Share it and spread it if you believe the same way. And remember his name on come election day this early August, starting on, you said the early voting begins shortly. Official voting, I guess, on the 1st, right?
Yeah, July 12th to the 27th is early voting, and August 1st is the primary election.
Right on. Well, there you go. Check them out there. And, of course, keep us in mind to share, rate, review, subscribe. If you want to be a part of the show, everything is at MMTBP.com. That is essentially mostly Middle Tennessee BusinessPodcast.com. That's a URL as well, but the shorter version of it is MMTBP.com. Mr. Jeter, thank you for coming out.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.